Have you ever heard of a man whose deepest secret was so shocking it changed the fate of an entire kingdom? Let me tell you the story of Obi, a charming young prince loved by his people, and how one decision on his wedding night unraveled his world. It was a night the kingdom of Amala had waited for, a grand celebration, drums beating in rhythm, the air filled with the sweet aroma of jollof rice and suya, and the palace shimmering with lights. The prince, now married to the beautiful Oma, was expected to step into his new life as a husband and soon to be king. But behind the closed doors of their magnificent chamber, something strange happened. Something that sent ripples of shock through the entire village. What could possibly have gone so wrong that the joyous sounds of the palace turned into whispers of disbelief by dawn? What secret had the prince kept hidden that could bring his world crashing down? Brace yourself for a tale of love, heartbreak, and redemption, where one mistake could ruin everything, or lead to an unexpected twist no one saw coming.
Subscribe to my channel.
The grand wedding of Prince Obi and Oma was the event of the year. The entire village of Amala had gathered to witness the union of their beloved prince and the elegant daughter of a renowned chief. The palace gates had been wide open since dawn, and laughter, music, and cheers echoed throughout the village. As the sun dipped below the horizon, the celebration reached its peak. Children danced in circles, women sang folk songs, and the men toasted to the future king and queen. But as the night wore on, the newlyweds retreated to their chambers, leaving the crowd to enjoy the feast. Oma's heart was pounding with excitement. She had waited years for this moment, the moment she would finally share a life with the man she loved. Dressed in a flowing wrapper of bright red and gold, her hair adorned with coral beads, she glowed like the full moon on a clear night. She looked at Prince Obi, who smiled softly at her as he led her into the grand bedroom. The room was nothing short of a royal paradise. The bed, made of polished mahogany, was draped in white silk. Golden lanterns cast a warm glow, and the air smelled faintly of roses. Oma clasped her hands together, her heart racing faster. This was the night she had dreamed of for so long. As soon as the door closed behind them, Oma turned to Obi with a smile that could melt the hardest heart. "My prince," she whispered, "I cannot believe this day is finally here. Tonight, our love will be complete." Obi smiled back, though his eyes betrayed a hint of hesitation. "Yes, my love," he said, his voice low, almost shaky. "It has been a long journey." Unable to hold back her excitement, Oma stepped closer and kissed him gently on the lips. But just as she began to deepen the kiss, Obi froze. He gently placed his hands on her shoulders and pulled away. Oma blinked in confusion. "What is it, my prince?" she asked softly, her brow furrowing. "Are you not happy?" Obi sighed deeply, avoiding her gaze. "I am tired, my love," he said, his voice barely above a whisper. "It has been a long day. Can we do this tomorrow?" Oma's face fell. For a moment, she stood there, silent, unsure of what to say. Then, summoning courage, she reached for his hand. "No, my prince," she said firmly but lovingly. "I have waited for years for this night. I cannot wait another minute." She kissed him again, this time with more urgency. Her hands trembled as she began to unfasten the golden sash around his waist. But as her fingers moved, Obi stepped back abruptly, his face pale. "Please, Oma," he pleaded, his voice trembling. Let me take my bath first." Without waiting for her response, he turned and disappeared into the adjoining bathroom, closing the door firmly behind him. The sound of running water soon followed. Oma stood there, stunned and confused. Her joy and excitement began to waver, replaced by a growing sense of unease. She sat on the edge of the bed, her mind racing. Minutes turned into an hour. Oma glanced at the clock, then at the bathroom door. "What is taking him so long?" she whispered to herself. Quietly, she rose from the bed and tiptoed to the door. Pressing her ear against it, she listened. All she could hear was the steady sound of water. No movement, no voice, nothing. Feeling a strange mix of worry and frustration, she returned to the bed and lay down. She closed her eyes, pretending to be asleep. A few minutes later, the bathroom door creaked open. Prince Obi stepped out, his footsteps soft on the polished floor. He paused, looking at Oma's still form on the bed. Believing she was asleep, he smiled faintly and climbed into bed beside her. But Oma wasn't asleep. The moment he settled down, she turned and kissed him again, catching him off guard. This time, she didn't hold back. Her hands moved to his robe, unbuttoning it with trembling fingers. What she saw beneath made her freeze. Her eyes widened in shock, her hands falling to her sides. What is this?" she stammered, her voice shaking. "Obi, what is this?" Her gaze was locked on his lower body, disbelief etched across her face. Obi sat up, his face pale as a ghost. "Oma, please, I can explain," he began, his voice breaking. This is why I wanted to wait. This is how I was born, but no," Oma screamed, cutting him off. Tears streamed down her face as she stumbled out of the bed. "Don't you dare touch me. I waited for years for this. Years. And this is what you hid from me? Oh my God, I am finished." She grabbed the door handle and yanked it open, her cries echoing through the palace. Obi reached out, trying to stop her, but she pushed him away and ran into the corridor, her wails filling the night. The maids and guards rushed to the scene, their faces filled with confusion and fear. "What happened?" one of the maids asked, her voice trembling. Oma sank to the floor, sobbing uncontrollably. "My husband lied to me," she cried. He has the manhood of a baby." Gasps filled the air as the truth of her words sank in. Whispers spread like wildfire, and soon the entire palace was buzzing with shock and disbelief. The joyous wedding night had turned into a nightmare.
Subscribe to my channel.
By the time the sun rose over the kingdom of Amala, the news had spread like wildfire. What had started as whispers in the palace had now become the talk of the entire village. Everywhere people gathered, by the river, in the market square, and under the shade of the ancient baobab tree, they spoke in hushed tones about Prince Obi's secret. The prince, a man with the strength of a lion. Yet this, one man muttered, shaking his head. "It's hard to believe," another replied. "Maybe his late father used him in some ritual. Who knows?" The women were no less vocal. Some giggled behind their hands, their voices dripping with mockery. "Imagine, someone as handsome as the prince. What a waste," one woman said, rolling her eyes dramatically. "Such a fine man, but all for nothing," added another, shaking her head with exaggerated pity. But while the villagers reveled in gossip, the palace had fallen silent. The once lively corridors were now heavy with shame and discomfort. Prince Obi had locked himself in his hut, refusing to see anyone. Even his most trusted advisors were left outside his door, knocking in vain. Inside, Obi sat on the floor, his back against the wall. His head was buried in his hands, his shoulders trembling as he wept. He could still hear Oma's cries echoing in his mind, her words cutting deeper than any sword. He had lost her, the woman he had loved and waited for all these years. And now, he had lost the respect of his people too. Days turned into weeks, and Obi's isolation only deepened. He no longer ventured outside to greet the villagers or stroll by the river. The thought of facing their stares, their whispers, was unbearable. The few times he tried, the humiliation was too much to bear. One such attempt came on a quiet afternoon when Obi decided to visit the stream to bathe. He hoped the midday sun would keep most villagers indoors, giving him some privacy. But as he walked toward the water, the silence around him was unsettling. He felt eyes on him, watchful, judgmental eyes. From behind bushes and trees, women peeked out, their faces a mix of curiosity and amusement. "Is it true?" one whispered. "Is he really like a child?" "I heard it's worse than that," another replied with a stifled laugh. Obi clenched his fists and quickened his pace, but the humiliation followed him like a shadow. By the time he returned to the palace, he vowed never to leave its walls again. Meanwhile, In the palace, Kiyoma, a young maid who had served Obi since childhood, watched him with a heavy heart. Kiyoma had always cared deeply for the prince. While others saw him as a royal figure, she saw the boy who had once shared his bread with her when she was a starving child, the young man who had defended her when other maids mocked her tattered clothes. To Kiyoma, Obi was not just her prince, he was a kind soul, one who deserved love and happiness. One evening, as the sun dipped low in the sky, Kiyoma knocked softly on Obi's door. When there was no answer, she pushed it open and stepped inside. The room was dark, the curtains drawn tight. Obi sat on his bed, staring at the floor. "My prince," Kiyoma began, her voice gentle, "you haven't eaten in days. Well, please, let me bring you something." "I'm not hungry," Obi replied without looking up. His voice was hoarse, heavy with despair. Kiyoma didn't leave. She walked over to him and placed a tray of food on a small table beside the bed. "You cannot go on like this," she said softly. "The people are talking, yes, but they will forget in time. You must not let this defeat you." Obi let out a bitter laugh, his eyes glistening with unshed tears. "Forget? Do you think they will ever forget this? I am a laughingstock, Kiyoma. How can I be a king when my people do not respect me?" Kiyoma knelt beside him, her hands clasped tightly together. "Your worth is not determined by their whispers, my prince," she said firmly. "You are a good man, a kind man, and there is still time to make things right. The throne awaits you, the kingdom needs you, but first you must take back your strength. You must fight for your future." Her words struck a chord deep within Obi. He looked at her, his eyes searching hers for any trace of pity, but he found none, only unwavering determination and kindness. "Do you believe I can fix this, Kiyoma?" he asked, his voice barely above a whisper. "I do," she replied, her gaze steady, "but you cannot do it alone." The next morning, Obi summoned his advisors. For the first time in weeks, he emerged from his hut, his face still pale but his posture firm. The elders gathered under the shade of the iroko tree, their expressions wary. "My lords," Obi began, his voice steady, "I know I have failed in many ways, but I refuse to let my father's legacy die with me. I will find a way to restore my honor and secure the throne." The elders exchanged glances, their faces softening. One of them, an old man named Amaechi, stepped forward. "My prince," he said, his voice deep and kind, "there is a woman, a healer, who lives in the distant village of Obodo. They say she has helped men with issues like yours. Perhaps she can help you too." Obi nodded, his jaw set with determination. "Then I will go," he declared. "Even if I must cross rivers and forests, I will find her." 2 days later, Obi set off on his journey, accompanied by Amaechi and a few trusted guards. The road was long and treacherous, winding through dense forests and across roaring rivers. But Obi pressed on, fueled by a renewed sense of purpose. When they finally arrived at the small village of Obodo, they were directed to a tiny hut at the edge of the settlement. Inside, an elderly woman with piercing eyes and a gentle smile greeted them. "I have been expecting you, Prince Obi," she said, her voice like the rustling of leaves. "Your journey will not be easy, but if you are willing to follow my guidance, you may find what you seek."
Subscribe to my channel.
Inside the healer's hut, the air was thick with the scent of herbs and smoke from a small clay pot bubbling in the corner. The old woman, who introduced herself as Mama Ejiro, motioned for Prince Obi to sit on a low wooden stool. Her wrinkled hands worked deftly as she mixed powders and liquids on a wooden table covered with bowls, jars, and bundles of dried leaves. "My prince," she began, her eyes gleaming with wisdom, "the issue you carry is not just of the body, but also of the spirit. Many men have come to me with similar burdens, and I have helped them all, but you must trust me and follow my instructions carefully." Obi nodded eagerly. "I will do whatever it takes, Mama. Please, help me." Mama Ejiro smiled faintly and handed him a small bottle filled with a dark, syrupy liquid and a jar of cream. "Take 1 cup of this drink every night for 7 days," she instructed, Rub the cream on yourself before bed. Do not rush the process and do not take more than I have prescribed. Patience, my son, is the key." Obi thanked her profusely and promised to follow her guidance. As they left the hut, Elder Amaechi placed a reassuring hand on Obi's shoulder. "You are on the right path, my prince," he said. "Soon this will all be behind you." That night, back at their camp, Obi stared at the bottle and the jar in his hands. Mama Ejiro's words echoed in his mind. Patience is the key. But as he looked at the items, doubt crept into his heart. "Why wait 7 days?" he muttered to himself. "What if I can fix this now? Time is running out. I have no room for delays." Driven by desperation, Obi uncorked the bottle and drank its entire contents in one gulp. The liquid was bitter, and it burned his throat, but he didn't care. He then opened the jar and applied the cream generously. Satisfied, he lay down to sleep, convinced that by morning, his problem would be solved. The next day, Obi awoke to a strange sensation around his waist. His body felt heavy, and when he tried to sit up, he couldn't move. Panic shot through him as he pulled back the blanket and looked down. His eyes widened in horror. "What is this?" he screamed. His manhood had grown to an enormous size, far beyond anything natural. It was so heavy that he could barely lift himself off the bed. Sweat poured down his face as fear gripped him. "What have I done?" he whispered, his voice trembling. His screams alerted Elder Amaechi and the guards, who rushed into the tent. Their faces turned pale as they took in the sight before them. "My prince, what happened?" Amaechi exclaimed. I drank the whole bottle," Obi confessed, his voice shaking. "I thought it would work faster." Amaechi's face darkened with worry. "You have made a grave mistake," he said. "We must take you back to Mama Ejiro immediately." By the time they returned to Mama Ejiro's hut, Obi was drenched in sweat and unable to walk without help. The healer's eyes narrowed as she examined him. "You were impatient," she said sternly. "I warned you, but you did not listen. Now, the remedy has overwhelmed your body. It will take time to reverse this." "Please, Mama," Obi pleaded, tears streaming down his face. "Help me. I cannot live like this." Mama Ejiro sighed deeply. "You must stay here for 1 month," she said. "I will prepare new herbs to gradually undo the damage, but you must follow my instructions exactly this time." Obi agreed, humbled and desperate. Over the next 4 weeks, Mama Ejiro treated him with care, using herbal baths, teas, and ointments. Slowly, his condition improved, and by the end of the month, his manhood had returned to its normal size. Obi was overjoyed. "Thank you, Mama," he said, bowing low before her. "You have saved my life." Mama Ejiro smiled. "Remember, my son, patience and humility are virtues every leader must possess. Do not forget this lesson." When Obi returned to the village, he kept the details of his journey a secret. But despite his efforts, whispers of his time with the healer had already begun to spread. Surprisingly, the gossip took on a different tone. One day, while bathing at the stream, Obi noticed a group of young women working nearby. They giggled and whispered, stealing glances at him. "Look at him," one said. "The prince is truly a man after all. I heard his ex-wife lied about him," another added. "What a foolish woman." Word spread quickly, and soon the women of Amala began flocking to the palace, hoping to catch the prince's eye. Obi was stunned by the sudden change in their behavior, but he remained cautious, unsure of who truly cared for him and who was merely chasing rumors. One day, while sitting in the palace courtyard, Obi saw Kioma passing by. She had been avoiding him since his return, quietly resuming her duties as a maid. But something in her shy, determined demeanor stirred something deep within him. "Kioma," he called out. She hesitated, then turned to face him. "Yes, my prince?" Obi stood and walked over to her. "Why have you been avoiding me?" he asked softly. Kioma lowered her gaze. "I didn't want to disturb you, my prince." Obi reached for her hand, his touch gentle. "You were the only one who believed in me when no one else did," he said. "You saw me as more than my title, more than my mistakes. Kioma, do you love me?" Her eyes widened, and her cheeks flushed. She tried to pull away, but Obi held her hand firmly. "Please," he said, his voice earnest, "answer me." Tears welled up in Kiyoma's eyes. "I have loved you since I was a girl," she admitted, "but I am just a maid. You deserve a queen, not someone like me." Obi smiled and knelt before her, to the shock of the onlookers. "Kiyoma, you are more than enough. You have shown me what true love and loyalty mean. Will you marry me?" The courtyard erupted in gasps and cheers as Kiyoma nodded, tears streaming down her face. "Yes, my prince," she whispered. "I will marry you." A few weeks later, the kingdom of Amala celebrated not only a royal wedding, but also the coronation of their new king and queen. As Obi and Kiyoma stood before their people, their hands clasped tightly, the crowd roared with approval. From that day forward, Obi ruled with wisdom and humility, always remembering the lesson he had learned. Patience, humility, and love were the true marks of a great leader.
Subscribe to my channel.